Necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention. Fear, however, is its deranged uncle who shows up at family gatherings with blueprints for doomsday devices. The Galactic Conquered had always prided itself on being beyond such primitive emotions. Their civilization spanned 17 spiral arms, encompassed 4,000 sentient species, and had solved problems ranging from faster-than-light travel to the perfect recipe for interspecies palatable cocktail snacks. They were by any reasonable measure the pinnacle of cosmic achievement, except when it came to weapons. Oh, how that fact irritated them. Across the vast reaches of charted space, civilizations had flourished for millennia. Species that had mastered quantum manipulation before humans had figured out agriculture now administered the galactic concordant with practiced efficiency. The Vexillians, with their crystalline neural networks, processed information at speeds that would make supercomputers weep with silicon envy. The Aldorans, with skin that could absorb and redirect energy, had eliminated their need for external power sources 8,000 years ago. Even the morph collectives of Cygnes Beta, essentially sentient gas clouds, had developed transportation systems that could move stars as casually as humans might rearrange furniture. Yet despite all their advancements, these ancient species found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't outthink or outmaneuver. Another emergency meeting, the ambassador from Proxima Centauri sighed, his translucent appendages rippling with annoyance as he settled into the chamber. This is the third one this cycle. I was in the middle of a 7-dimensional opera. Would that be the one where everyone dies at the end? Asked the Jovian representative, her compound eyes blinking in sequence. They're all like that, muttered a crystalline entity from somewhere in the back. The grand hall of the Galactic Concordant gleamed with technology so advanced it bordered on magical. Holographic displays floated between delegates, quantum translators hummed quietly, and gravity adjusters ensured that species from worlds with vastly different mass felt equally comfortable. This was the pinnacle of galactic cooperation, where the most brilliant minds gathered to solve the universe's most pressing problems, and they were about to be thoroughly embarrassed by primates. I call this emergency session to order, announced the chair being, a vaguely arachnid creature whose species had evolved beyond the need for names. As you all know, the voracious hegemony has breached the Perseus armed defense perimeter. A collective murmur swept through the assembly. The voracious, a hive mind of semi-organic machines that consumed all technology in their path, had been the galaxy's boogeyman for centuries. They emerged from the void between galaxies every few hundred years, consumed what they could, and retreated before anyone could mount an effective response. The Unified Defense Council has exhausted conventional options, continued the chair being. Our standard weapon systems are being assimilated faster than we can deploy them. A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing footage of sleek, elegant defense platforms being overwhelmed by the chaotic, churning mass of the voracious swarm. The advanced weaponry designed by the finest minds in the galaxy was being absorbed and repurposed almost instantly. How long until they reach populated systems? Asked a delegate from Arcturus. 72 standard cycles, replied the chair being, unless we find a solution. The Vexillian ambassador's crystalline structure pulsed with light patterns that indicated deep concern. We've tried every weapon in our considerable arsenal, our quantum disruptors, our reality anchors, our causality inverters, all ineffective. What about those new arrivals? Croaked a delegate from a water world. The ones who just figured out faster-than-light travel about 15 minutes ago, cosmically speaking. A profound silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the occasional hum of environmental systems adjusting to accommodate the various biological needs of the delegates. You can't possibly mean, began the Aldorian representative. The humans, finished the chair being, that is precisely what the council is proposing. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices and equivalent communications from species that didn't use sound. Preposterous, they still fight among themselves over imaginary lines on their planet. They've barely stopped poisoning their own atmosphere. Half of them still believe in supernatural deities. The chair being raised all 8 of its upper appendages for silence. Nevertheless, there is something, unique about their approach to weaponry. A new hologram appeared, displaying a planet that looked absurdly fragile, a delicate blue marble suspended in the void. Earth, home to a species that had gone from throwing rocks to splitting atoms in an evolutionary blink. The humans have only been space-capable for 3 of their centuries, explained the chief science officer, a being composed primarily of ionized gas contained within a sophisticated environmental suit. Yet in that time, they've developed more variations of weapons than the rest of the Concordat combined. Displays began cycling through human history. Spears, bows, catapults, gunpowder, cannons, rifles, machine guns, tanks, planes, bombs, missiles, lasers, rail guns, orbital platforms, and more esoteric devices that defied easy categorization. While we perfected a handful of elegant weapons over millennia, continued the science officer, humans created thousands of increasingly destructive devices in mere generations. Their military history is disturbingly creative. The Jovian representative's mandibles clicked in disapproval. So they're good at killing each other. How does that help us against the voracious? Because, said the chair being slowly, the voracious adapt to patterns. Our weapons are logical extrapolations of established scientific principles. Human weapons, however, often defy logical progression. They're unpredictable, sometimes counterintuitive, occasionally ridiculous, and therefore potentially harder for the voracious to counter. The Vexillian ambassador's crystalline body flashed with patterns of skepticism. You expect us to put our fate in the hands of beings who invented the concept of overkill. I expect us to use every resource at our disposal, replied the chair being, including allies with unconventional perspectives. Just then, the chamber door slid open, and a human diplomatic contingent entered. The aliens observed the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled disdain. By galactic standards, humans were unimpressive specimens. Bilateral symmetry, limited sensory capacity, fragile bodies with no natural defenses, and brains that could process only a fraction of the information that most advanced species could handle. They wore environmental suits that seemed laughably primitive compared to the technology that surrounded them. The lead human, a person of medium height with dark hair and an expression that suggested they were trying very hard not to touch anything, approached the central platform. You requested weapons consultants, the human said, voice remarkably steady for someone addressing the most powerful assembly in the galaxy. We did, confirmed the chair being. Your species has a reputation. The human's face performed a series of minor muscle contractions that the aliens had learned to interpret as amusement. Yes, we've noticed how the other delegations look at us during trade negotiations, like we might suddenly declare war on the buffet table. Your species developed nuclear weapons before you developed effective vaccines for common diseases, noted the Aldorian representative dryly. Fair point, acknowledged the human. But in our defense, actually no, I don't have a defense for that. It's pretty concerning when you put it that way. The chair being's appendages made a gesture that approximated a dismissive wave. Nevertheless, the voracious threat requires unconventional solutions. Your military advisors will be granted temporary access to our technology database. We need weapons the voracious cannot predict or assimilate. The human's expression shifted subtly. So let me get this straight. You, the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, are asking us, the species that still hasn't figured out how to create sustainable political systems, to design weapons to save everyone. That is correct, confirmed the chair being. Because we're good at blowing stuff up. Essentially, the human suppressed what appeared to be a smile. Just wanted to be clear, we'll need full access to your manufacturing capabilities and material sciences division. The Vexillian ambassador's crystalline structure vibrated with alarm. Absolutely not. That would be like giving a primitive simian access to the only technology that might save your crystalline behind, interrupted the human. Look, we can stand here arguing about how primitive we are, or we can get to work on weapons that might actually stop the voracious. Your choice. The chamber fell silent again, this time with a distinctly uncomfortable quality. Very well, the chair being finally conceded. Full access granted, but know that you will be monitored at all times. The human shrugged. Fair enough, just don't be alarmed by our methods. They might seem unorthodox. As the human delegation was escorted from the chamber, the Proximus Centauri ambassador leaned toward his Aldorian colleague. Did we just hand over the keys to our most advanced technology to creatures who invented the concept of using a bigger rock to hit someone. Yes, replied the Aldorian, but remember they also invented something called duct tape that they claim can fix anything in the universe. And that's supposed to be reassuring. No, sighed the Aldorian, that's what makes it terrifying. The Concordat's research facility orbiting Taweti was the size of a small moon, though calling it a facility was like calling a supernova a warm day. Inside its cavernous halls, the collective scientific knowledge of 4,000 species was archived, analyzed, and applied to pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And now it was being turned upside down by creatures who still found fart jokes amusing. What exactly are they doing? Asked the Aldorian supervisor, watching through an observation portal as the human team unpacked crates of equipment that had arrived via their own transport ships. I believe they call it brainstorming, replied the Vexillian analyst, the crystal facets of their form refracting light in patterns that indicated severe skepticism. Though from their brain waves, it appears more like thought drizzling at best. Inside the laboratory, the human team had commandeered several holographic displays and was simultaneously projecting data about the voracious, conquered weapon systems and what appeared to be ancient Earth entertainment media. Are they watching cartoons? The Aldorian's voice modulator couldn't quite capture the incredulity in their thought patterns. Apparently they call it inspiration, replied the Vexillian. I've been monitoring their communications. Half their weapon ideas come from their fictional entertainment. That can't possibly be true. The humans have a saying, truth is stranger than fiction. In their case, the line between the two seems remarkably permeable. Inside the lab, the humans had formed small groups, each tackling the problem from different angles. Unlike the methodical, hierarchical approach of concordant research teams, the human process appeared chaotic, almost random. They argued, laughed, sketched improbable designs on whatever surfaces were available, and occasionally threw objects at each other in what the aliens eventually realized was not aggression, but some form of ideation ritual. Their approach lacks all scientific rigor, observed a morph collective representative who had joined the observation team, their gaseous form swirling with agitation inside their containment field. Perhaps, acknowledged the Aldorian, but they've made more progress in 12 hours than our teams did in 12 cycles. On the main display, one of the humans was gesturing animatedly at a simulation of the voracious swarm behavior. Look, these things adapt to energy signatures, right? They analyze the pattern, then develop countermeasures. Correct, replied the concordant AI assistant assigned to the humans. Their adaptation rate for standardized weapons is approximately 3.7 seconds. So what if we don't use a standard pattern? The human grinned. What if the weapon itself evolves? Weapon evolution is a common design principle, the AI responded. The Concordat has developed self-modifying defensive systems for... No, interrupted another human. Not like that. You guys think linearly, predictably. Your weapons evolve along established pathways. What if we created weapons that evolve randomly, chaotically? The AI's response time stretched to several seconds, an eternity for a system that normally processed information at near light speeds. Such a weapon would be unpredictable. Exactly, the human clapped their hands together. Unpredictable to us, unpredictable to the voracious. It would also be extremely dangerous, noted the AI. Control parameters would be difficult to establish. The humans exchanged glances that the observing aliens couldn't interpret. Control is overrated, said one human quietly. Well, that's terrifying, muttered the Aldorian supervisor. 3 days later, the Concordat High Command received the first prototype proposals. The presentation chamber, designed to accommodate beings of all physical compositions, fell into a stunned silence as the human team displayed their concepts. You can't be serious, said the defense minister, a being composed of magnetic fields contained within a precision-engineered suit. These designs violate 17 different safety protocols. Yeah, we figured they might, the lead human engineer shrugged, but they'll work. The first proposal is particularly concerning, continued the minister. A weapon that intentionally destabilizes its own containment field. We call it the Chaos Cascade, explained the human. It's based on the principle that a controlled failure can sometimes be more effective than sustained operation. You're proposing we intentionally create failing technology. The minister's magnetic field pulsed with what might have been hysterical laughter in a biological species. Think of it like an immune system, suggested another human. When your body fights an infection, it doesn't just use one approach. It throws everything at the problem, including random mutations and error-prone cells. Sometimes it's the mistakes that find the solution. The Vexillian science director's crystalline form vibrated slightly, their equivalent of a slow, skeptical headshake. Your biological metaphors are not reassuring when applied to weapons systems that could potentially destroy entire star systems. Look, said the lead human, leaning forward. You've all been fighting the voracious with perfect weapons, elegant weapons, beautiful weapons that are marvels of engineering and physics, and they've all failed spectacularly. A holographic display activated, showing footage of the most recent voracious incursion. The alien hive machines swarmed over conquered defense platforms, assimilating their technology in seconds. The voracious predict what your weapons will do because they're designed by the same logical principles you use for everything else, continued the human. You need weapons that don't make sense, weapons that are deliberately flawed, weapons that break the rules. Humans, observed the Aldorian representative dryly, certainly excel at breaking rules. Damn right we do, agreed the human with a grin. Now can we move on to our second concept? We call it the Rube Goldberg. The holographic display shifted to show a weapon system of mind-boggling complexity, with multiple interconnected components that seemed to serve no clear purpose. This makes no sense whatsoever, said the Morph Collective representative, their gaseous form churning with confusion. That's exactly the point, replied the human. It's deliberately overcomplicated. The voracious analyze weapon systems to identify the key components, then target those first. With this design, they can't identify what's important because everything both is and isn't crucial to operation. It's like trying to find the plot in a reality television show, added another human. There isn't one, but your brain keeps insisting there must be. The defense minister's suit emitted a sound like static discharge, their species equivalent of a sigh. These approaches are unorthodox. That's why you hired us, pointed out the lead human. You've tried orthodox failed. The chair being, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. You mentioned a third concept. Yes, the human team exchanged glances again. This one is, well, even we think it's a bit extreme. The holographic display changed once more, showing what appeared to be a standard missile design, but with components that made no apparent sense. We call this one the Murphy, said the lead human, after an old Earth law that states anything that can go wrong will go wrong. You've designed a weapon to fail? Asked the Vexillian, unable to hide their confusion. No, replied the human. We've designed a weapon that looks like it's going to fail catastrophically, but actually works perfectly by failing in exactly the right way. Silence fell over the chamber again as the implications sank in. Voracious analyze our weapons and adapt to them, explained the human. So we give them something that looks like it's about to undergo catastrophic failure. They'll adapt to what they think is about to happen, but what actually happens is something completely different. It's like convincing someone you're going to punch them in the face, added another human, but then kicking them in the shins instead. A deception strategy, mused the chair being. Interesting. Deception is a core principle of human warfare, said the lead human. We've elevated it to an art form. The defense minister's magnetic field fluctuated rapidly, indicating rapid processing of new information. These proposals are unorthodox, but they may have merit. We need to test them, said the chair being. Controlled conditions, isolated systems. The lead human nodded. We've anticipated that. We'll need a secure testing facility and materials for prototype construction. It will be arranged, confirmed the chair being. But I must emphasize the need for caution. These concepts are volatile. Of course, agreed the human with what the aliens were learning to recognize as a not entirely sincere smile. Safety first. As the meeting adjourned, the Aldorian representative approached the chair being. Are we certain this is wise? They asked quietly. Giving humans access to our advanced manufacturing technology, allowing them to build weapons based on principles of chaos and deception. The chair being's appendages made a gesture that approximated a shrug. The voracious will reach inhabited systems in 65 cycles. What choice do we have? I understand the necessity, replied the Eldorian, but there's something unsettling about how enthusiastic they are about creating weapons. Perhaps that enthusiasm is precisely what we need, suggested the chair being. For millennia, we've approached weapons as a regrettable necessity. Humans approach them with creativity. That's what worries me, muttered the Eldorian. 2 weeks later, the first prototype tests began in a remote star system that had been evacuated specifically for this purpose. The Concordat High Command observed from a safe distance, their ships positioned well outside the test zone. The human team had constructed scaled-down versions of their 3 primary designs. Each would be deployed against a small sample of captured voracious technology, a dangerous undertaking but necessary to determine effectiveness. Test 1 commencing, announced the human team leader over the communication system. Deploying Chaos Cascade prototype. The observers watched as a sleek, deceptively simple device approached the containment field holding the voracious sample. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the device began to change, components shifted, energy signatures fluctuated wildly, and what appeared to be errors cascaded through its systems. To the Concordat observers, it looked like a catastrophic malfunction. Is it supposed to do that? Asked the Vexillian science director nervously. Yes, replied the human. Watch what happens next. The voracious sample extended tendrils toward the apparently failing device, beginning its standard assimilation process. But as it connected, something unexpected occurred. Instead of being absorbed and analyzed, the human weapon's chaotic fluctuations seemed to transfer to the voracious sample itself. The alien technology began to vibrate, then to distort, and finally to break apart into component molecules. What just happened? Demanded the defense minister. The chaos cascade worked exactly as intended, explained the human. It created a pattern of failures that the voracious attempted to assimilate, but the pattern itself was designed to corrupt their adaptive process. You weaponized failure, said the Eldorian, a note of reluctant admiration in their voice. Humans have a long history of turning our mistakes into advantages, replied the human with a smile. We're uniquely qualified to weaponize failure because we've had so much practice failing. The Concordat representatives exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time in centuries, they had seen voracious technology destroyed rather than merely contained. It was a significant breakthrough, but achieved through methods that defied their understanding of proper weapon design. Shall we proceed to test 2? Asked the human. The Rube Goldberg is my personal favorite. The chair being's appendages twitched slightly, their species equivalent of nervous anticipation. Proceed, they said. And as the second test began, even the most skeptical observers had to admit, perhaps there was something to be said for the chaotic human approach after all. Testing station Alpha 9 buzzed with more anxiety than a quantum uncertainty principle. 17 species of aliens watched in horror as the humans repeatedly dismantled, modified, and reassembled their weapon prototypes with casual disregard for safety protocols. 14th revision this week, muttered the Eldorian liaison. They call it iterative development. I call it manufacturing heart attacks in species that don't even have hearts. Below, humans crawled over their prototype like repair bots on a malfunctioning cruiser, shouting, laughing, and occasionally throwing tools to each other with alarming nonchalance. Why must they physically touch everything? Asked a gaseous morph collective observer. Apparently their brains work better when their appendages are risking electrocution, replied the Eldorian. The chair being entered suddenly. The voracious have accelerated their approach, 48 cycles until they reach populated systems. The humans have requested immediate authorization for full-scale testing, they continued. I've granted it. The room erupted in overlapping protests. These weapons need safety protocols. Proper protocols won't matter if we're all consumed, interrupted the chair being. The time for caution has passed. 4 hours later, a substantial voracious sample sat secured in a containment field as the human weapon, now unrecognizable from its original design, waited on a deployment platform. Initiating deployment, announced the lead human engineer. The weapon approached the containment field, initially mimicking standard concordant protocols. The voracious sample extended tendrils toward its surface, rippling with mechanical anticipation. Initiating catastrophic failure simulation. Suddenly, the weapon began to spark and shudder. Warning indicators flashed as it appeared to malfunction spectacularly. The voracious tendrils hesitated, a reaction never before observed. "It's confused," whispered the Morph Collective observer. Deploying the quantum fizz, what happened next defied description. The weapon existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously, its energy signature fluctuating wildly. When the voracious tendrils touched it, they began to dissolve, not physically but fundamentally. Their quantum coherence unraveled, spreading throughout the entire sample. Within seconds, the dangerous alien technology was reduced to disorganized molecules. "Complete molecular disintegration confirmed," said the Aldorian. "No functional components remain." "How?" demanded the Vexillian science director. "That defies 17 different laws of quantum mechanics." 18, actually, corrected the human. "We broke one more just for good measure." "That's impossible," insisted the Vexillian. "You've been approaching quantum mechanics as immutable laws," replied the human. "We approach them as guidelines with flexible interpretations." "Can this weapon be scaled up for deployment?" asked the chair being. "Absolutely," confirmed the human. "We'll need your advanced fabrication facilities and 20 tons of coffee, but it's doable." As the observers departed, the Aldorian remained with the chair being. "Will it work?" they asked quietly. "I don't know," admitted the chair being. "I find myself hopping, a novel sensation after centuries of logical calculation." "The humans seem to operate on hope rather than certainty," observed the Aldorian. "Perhaps that's their greatest weapon of all." In the chamber below, the human team began scaling up their prototype, fueled by success and alarming quantities of caffeine. And the watching aliens finally understood why humans made the galaxy's most advanced weapons. Not because they were smarter, but because they refused to accept that something was impossible simply because everyone else said it was. The Strategic Command Center, a structure spanning an entire asteroid, hosted the largest assembly in Concordat history. Species that had been enemies for millennia stood shoulder to whatever passed for shoulders, united by their mutual desire not to be consumed. The holographic display showed the voracious advance, a churning mass of semi-organic machines that had already devoured 3 uninhabited systems. 24 cycles until they reach Proxima Colony, announced the defense minister. Status of the human weapon deployment vessels. In position, replied the tactical officer. The humans call it Project Pandora. Another mythological reference. Yes, apparently it means releasing something unpredictable that cannot be contained. How reassuring, muttered the Vexillian. The human team made final adjustments to their deployment protocols, surrounded by bewildered Concordat engineers. Are your people always this calm before potential annihilation? Asked the chair being. The human commander glanced up. Oh, we're not calm, we just process existential terror differently. Some make jokes, some focus on the task, some triple-check everything. Evolution is funny that way, they continued. Fear either paralyzes you or makes you hyper-focused. Natural selection favored ancestors who could still function while terrified, and now the galaxy's fate rests on that adaptation. Ironic, isn't it? The species you consider too primitive might be the only one capable of saving everyone. The tactical display flashed an alert. The voracious had changed course, accelerating toward the deployment vessels. Perfect, said the human commander. They're taking the bait. This was planned, asked the chair being. Of course, we wanted them to detect our ships. Initiate Phase 1, ordered the human. The deployment vessels moved to intercept the voracious fleet, which spread out to surround what they perceived as conventional Concordat defenders. Now for the fun part, said the human. Initiate Phase 2, catastrophic systems failure. Throughout the command center, warning indicators flashed as the deployment vessels appeared to suffer simultaneous critical malfunctions. Exactly what we planned, assured the human as the voracious hesitated, a behavior never before observed. They don't recognize the failure pattern. As the Voracious made contact with the first vessel, the command center fell silent. But instead of assimilation, the enemy's tendrils began to fluctuate chaotically. The disturbance spread through their fleet, disrupting their coordinated movements. Deploy the quantum fizz. The deployment vessels reconfigured into formations that defied conventional engineering. Where the leading edge of the Voracious fleet had been, a rapidly expanding cloud of disassociated molecules appeared. "It worked," whispered the Vexillian science director. The effect spread through the Voracious fleet like a wave. Within hours, the existential threat to galactic civilization was reduced to dispersing atomic particles. 3 cycles later, the Concordat convened for a formal recognition ceremony. "For millennia, we prided ourselves on logical progression and elegant solutions," declared the chair being. "Today, we acknowledge the limitations of that approach. Therefore, Earth and its colonies are granted full concordant membership, with special recognition of their unique contributions to defensive technologies. Additionally, we establish a joint weapons development initiative, combining concordant resources with human creativity. Finally, we formally acknowledge what recent events have made clear. The most advanced weapons in the galaxy are made by humans, not because they possess superior technology, but because they possess something we had evolved beyond: the ability to think irrationally when rational approaches fail." As the ceremony concluded, the Aldorian liaison found themselves in conversation with the Vexillian science director. "Will we regret this decision?" asked the Vexillian quietly. "Bringing humans fully into the Concordat." "Perhaps," acknowledged the Aldorian. "They are unpredictable, occasionally violent, and still find amusement in the most primitive behaviors." "Then why risk it?" The Aldorian's energy-absorbing skin rippled thoughtfully. "Because sometimes the most logical approach is to be deliberately illogical." Across the reception hall, humans had already begun teaching ancient civilizations about drinking games and karaoke. Their laughter echoed through the chamber as dignified representatives of species that had mastered interstellar travel before humans had discovered fire now attempted to balance objects on their various appendages for amusement. And throughout the Concordat, the message became clear. Perfection had nearly cost them everything, while beautiful imperfection had saved them.